you get a chance to watch any of the battle reports for 5 Leagues in the Borderlands?
I was clicking in a few. Yeah, there's a couple of people in my Discord who are big fans of yours, so they were kind of posting the ups and downs as you were kind of like going through it.
Yeah, it got a little dicey there for a bit.
I thought it was really interesting though, because it's like whenever you're like write stuff, you're gonna get a lot of people who are just kind of like amazed that it exists. So It's always interesting to hear like a little bit more of a, like any game is gonna have like specific like rough points or things that like just get weird,
Well, that's especially in a game where the nature of it is RNG, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's procedurally generated, it's all interconnected.
Oh yeah.
There's no way you could play test every permutation that's going to come through that.
Mm-mm.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to Inside Tabletop. I am joined today by the author of great games like how many titles, how many books you've written? Because when you go to DriveThruRPG, it is shocking.
I had a count of them. It's more than 30, but I don't know if it's hit 40. Let's just call it a couple.
Well, this is Ivan Sorenson of Nordic Weasel Games. I'm so glad he's here today. We're going to have a pair of conversations today and plan out 2 of these. We're going to talk about some kind of inside baseball stuff on game design. Yeah. Because you are a prolific writer. In 30-something titles is a lot of writing. It's a real testament to your stamina doing this. How many years have you been doing this?
It's coming up on, I want to say 6 or 7 years now. So there's been some time to like, process on it. Some of those have also gone through multiple editions and, and
you're full time.
Part of it is
this is your main gig. This is your 9 to 5.
Yeah, it's the only thing I do. We can talk a little bit about like diversifying like income streams and stuff too, because obviously there's things like Patron and direct sales.
Definitely.
And
well, that was plan for video number 2. Today we're going to talk about how do you get started? How do you get through that gate basically of writing and designing your first game? And I get that question all the time: is how do I become a game designer? And you've done this when most people only have like a game in them. You've got 30 plus ideas out there that are interconnected or not. And that's a huge accomplishment. I think I want to hear basically your take on it. What is it that if you could pull these games out of yourself, if you could go back and talk to, a younger version of you, what would you say? Because I want to play more versions of 5 Leagues in the Borderlands. I got a completely selfish reason for doing this because I think that there's people out there that might not have put their game out into the world to have this information and not necessarily emulate you, but be able to navigate more smoothly the process of getting their first game out.
Yeah. I think the place everyone really needs to start, and everyone kind of skips this step, I did too, is to actually like sit down and think about what it is you're trying to achieve with a game or with writing in general. Because a lot of people, I think, try to do like business writing or writing as a career, when it turns out that what they actually wanted was just to have like be able to say that they had done it. They had written a game to completion. It's maybe on Wargames Vault or DriveThru, and that's it. That's all they wanted. That's all they were happy with. And trying to do more than that, they run into like, okay, well, I don't really have any other ideas. I'm not really interested in any other stuff. And you end up kind of like ending it on like a sour note because it feels like you failed at something, which you didn't have to fail at because your actual goal was one that you did do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
you got it out, you got it in front of you.
Yeah, and if that's all you wanted to do with it, because like writing doesn't have to be a career; it can be a hobby. There's a misconception that it can only be a hobby, which I think is like super wrong for obvious reasons. Conversely, if you are going to go into it wanting it to be a job or a part-time job or whatever you want it to be, or you want it to land you like with one of the bigger publishers, or you're trying to like transition into like video games or whatever, you have to like start looking at it as it is going to be a job, even if initially it kind of isn't, because you're going to write something that sells 47 copies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you have to kind of have that level of like energy about it. Like some of it is honestly, and this is the thing that like I think a lot of people kind of get wrong, is creative stuff is fun when you're thinking about it. if you're sitting and, like we all have ideas.
Yes.
If you get 5 nerds together, they will have 12 different ideas. And, those ideas can be good or bad. That doesn't really matter so much. But nobody cares about your ideas. That's like the hard lesson that anyone needs to like sit down and learn. Like your idea is worthless.
Yeah.
What you can sit down and put on paper or put on the computer, like the time spent at the keyboard and the time doing the work, that's what makes that idea into something.
Yeah. The word I would use is stamina. Your stamina for writing and getting through the work part of writing is so key.
Yes, absolutely. And some of it, I've talked on my blog about what I've termed the suck. And people have different words for it. Every author will have this thing. You'll see them, but they all like call it something different. But it's basically like whichever part of a project or creative project that you don't like to do. In my case, it's famously terrain rules. I hate writing them because I think they're pointless. I never use them and I never look them up when I play games. But you can't like put a game out without having that stuff. So or like doing layout or like proofreading. Like there's always going to be a part of that process that's just kind of boring and you don't want to do it. And
but it's so key to the end use experience, right? Because it's never the thing that you're inspired about that you write that people end up coming back to you with first. It's always the thing that's clunky or doesn't work. And that is the most discouraging thing at the beginning of like writing something.
Oh, absolutely. Like the thing everyone notices is that you kind of didn't explain how like selecting a target works or something.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it obviously works the same as it does in every other game, but you can't, you have to like grind it out and nail those things down. And
be open to that feedback too, right?
Yeah, you have to agree. Like, I forget the error now, but there's an error in 5 parsecs where some really basic thing is not explained. And it is so basic that nobody noticed except for like one guy who was like, what actually happens when X? And I don't remember what it is now, unfortunately. So that kind of ruins the story. But it's kind of the danger of it that it is so easy to take this body of knowledge for granted. And you're going to run into a player who doesn't take it for granted. Like one of the things I run into a lot with parsecs and leagues when the glossy books happened was it picked up a huge audience of people who are RPG folks. And they didn't have all the shared experiences that the miniatures guys did. So suddenly, like really simple things like how do I set up like a Wargames table? That, we would just kind of gloss over because we do it in the usual way. Like everyone knows how you do that until you don't.
Yeah. Until it's something that you've never done before. And you as the designer have to walk them through it.
Oh, absolutely. Which is also why when you look at a lot of independent games, they are not aimed at beginners because you get to skip a bunch of that stuff.
That's funny. That can you talk more about that? Because that is a real thing I've noticed in indie game design is we tend to have a bunch of, I don't want to call it elitism, but it's kind of like the guys that sit around the record store talking about like, were the Yardbirds better than, the Smiths? Like you want to kind of prove by playing an indie game that's harder to play that you already get like a bunch of stuff intrinsically.
There's definitely a lot of that. I think a lot of it is subconscious. I think a lot of it, the starting point is that the only people we expect to pick up an indie game are people who are like rules nerds. And therefore you can just target them directly. But of course that kind of creates this feedback effect where if I'm looking to get into miniatures gaming, because I've seen like Instagram photos of like Space Marines or whatever, but I don't really want to play Warhammer. So I go find some indie game and then it's incomprehensible gibberish because it's written for people who already took the first 10 steps. Yeah, I think that's really difficult because, again, spending all that time aiming it at beginners is you get 2 things. One, it just kind of sucks to do. It's not stuff anyone is interested in doing. And 2, it's a lot of page count that the other half of the people picking up that game will just kind of think is wasted. Think about the last time you picked the last like 5 RPG books you purchased. How many of them did you actually read that little thing at the beginning explaining that role playing is like playing cops and robbers?
Yeah, never.
Right.
Once, yeah.
We all know it's in there. But that paragraph, most people would think that could have been spent for an extra character class or some more background about the Dark Lord of so-and-so.
Yeah, but you're kind of future-proofing it in case it reaches an audience that you're not expecting it to reach, and that's kind of like an important key thing. Like,
or you're cutting down your future email inbox.
That feels like an experience. I was going to say that feels like an experiential thing that you've learned over time, though. right? So like let's walk that back for a second, because I feel like we're skipping to the end, and talk about that beginning process where you've written your first thing versus 29 things later. Now you've written almost your 30th thing. If you could go back in time and give yourself nuggets of wisdom when you compare those early things to the older things, what are, like, let's say, I'll throw a number at like 3 to 4 things that you picked up that you didn't have in the beginning that you've got now?
I think the absolute most important thing is to not be precious about things. You're going to get people who don't like a particular rule. They don't like a particular concept. They don't like the way you did a certain thing. Sometimes they still like the game. Sometimes everyone has gotten that email from somebody who's like super mad about one specific tiny thing.
Yeah. It was dogs in Last Days. When I wrote Last Days, everyone thinks I hate dogs because dogs couldn't run. I gave them an 8-inch move, but they couldn't run. So everyone was like, dogs can't run. Dogs can't pick things up. My dog's smart. And I'm like, I don't know your dog. And I got so many angry emails about dogs for like no reason, just because I tried to make them animals in the rules. And oh geez, it was a nightmare of me being a dog hater. It was so funny.
Yeah, many years ago, I got an email from a guy who was mad that I tend to use the word dash for running in games. And he was mad because that sounds kind of like a word for an Islamic terror group. And he thought was inappropriate.
Or intentional,
like, Yeah, but it was like, I hear you, but that is also just like a word in English. So, you can't. But you're going to get like, and I caught myself this the other day. I was trolling around. I don't read reviews all that much, which is something like every like book author will tell you, like, don't do that. That's like self-hatred.
Posting ghost.
Yeah. I was poking around, I think Board Game Geek, and there was this guy who was posting about 5 Leagues, and he was saying he didn't like the combat system. I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then he said, it was the smallest thing, but he said, because there's no rules for higher ground. And I'm like, beep, like you get combat advances right here, but you have to just like let that go. And I don't know why it was just like this tiny thing that like nailed itself into me. And
it's funny how those little things too chip away at your vision, right? Because you always have a vision for what it needs to be, and you have to kind of like sort the useful feedback from the feedback that's like, yeah, that could be that way, but it's going to stop it from now being the vision I have for this thing. And it's really interesting how you kind of have to sort that stuff out in your head.
Yeah, that's kind of the second, I guess that kind of ties into the second thing I would say is it's really difficult to get feedback, especially if you're not really a name. Like when you have stuff to your name, it's easier because people are just excited and they want to see what it is. It's still hard to get like actual good feedback, but you can get it. If you're starting out, it is really difficult. So there's a tendency of then assuming that the feedback you do get must all be important and must all be valuable. But some of those people are just kind of wrong. And you can't tell them that because, you want to be nice, but, they are mad about a rule, or they're even worse. They're excited about a rule that you realize they didn't play right. Like they screwed it up, and your game isn't as good as they think it is, or
but that could be useful too. You could just steal that.
That was the intention all along. But yeah, like filtering through feedback, both when it comes to reviews, but also when it comes to like reader feedback or player feedback, you have to kind of like pick through, because some people are excited about your game because they think it is going to be something else that they wanted you to make, or they wanted somebody to make. This can happen a lot, especially if you're like for stuff like parsecs and leagues, because they kind of like lap that miniatures RPG overlap. You're going to get people who come in like not necessarily understanding why things are a certain way. Like miniatures gamers do things a particular way, RPG people do things a particular way. So some of those things they won't necessarily understand, and you have to kind of sit back and think, like, is this feedback, like, is this an actual problem, which it might be. In that case, you need to think about that. Or is it that maybe the vision isn't clear enough, or they're just wrong? I mean, they're bad people or bad feedback. They're just not right about that particular thing.
Over time, have you approached how you collect it differently? Like, have you over time collected people that give you really good feedback that now are like a core playtest group that kind of get each time what you're trying to do? And if you have got that, do you now curate how you ask for feedback? Because that was something that was useful for me, was when I'd send the document out, I'd almost have like a feedback primer of like, this is my intent. this is the feedback I'm looking for in this iteration. Focus on this part for now. We'll handle the rest of this stuff later.
Yeah. So when I do, over the years, I've tried like every possible permutation. So I've done stuff that was developed like in public, where people could see from like the very beginning. I've done stuff where here's the book, at the end. I think it's definitely helpful to like nail down what you're actually looking for, because that keeps people from like spinning off too much. Like if you're at the stage where you're just getting feedback for like a combat mechanic and like does the basic structure work, then you don't really need you need to kind of like pin people to that. I do have a handful of people that I implicitly trust because they will tell me if it's dumb, or if I'm overusing something, or if it's too like similar to something else. And you have to kind of like catalog those over time. One of the things I need to get better at is being more systematic with like tracking feedback, because I tend to just kind of keep this like mental idea. Like I have this box in my head of roughly where the sort of community sentiment is on something, and then I can kind of like pick at that. But like there's
and everyone's going to do that differently. Like people, I know some people that have like whole like Google Sheets things that they then like sift for like terms and stuff like that. Like there are some very, very calculated ones too. That's not for me either. I'm like, oh no, thank you. I'm a vibes guy. Give me some vibes.
Yeah, I think for errata that's fine, because you can get people who are like super nerds at like picking out that you got the wrong number on page 59 or whatever. That's useful, but yeah, I think you have to kind of. Like the important thing is to like have a system so you're taking that stuff into account, and then being able to like step away from it, and like because sometimes you also just have to kind of like grit your teeth and like do the thing you wanted to do all along.
So what's anything else?
Yeah. The last thing I think is, and this is kind of a offshoot of the previous two. These are very like social oriented and less process, I suppose. But I think that'll help you get to the process, and I'll talk about processes a little bit, is be very like mindful of yourself online. And I don't want to get into like a whole bunch of stuff about the internet, because the internet is what it is, but it is very easy to end up spending a lot of time, especially if you are trading on personality, and some game designers do. I do a bit, some do a lot. Or it applies to like media stuff too. I'm sure you can speak to this very well.
Yes, guilty. It's
Yes.
funny. This came up in my Inside Tabletop with my author friend Miles Cameron, Christian Cameron, in real life, where he talked about the difference between being an author 20 years ago when he started 25 years ago, and today is you're fully responsible with your own marketing. Like if you want to be successful, you also need to actively like engage your personal collection of customers, you know what I mean? And so I think you're very true being mindful about that. Yeah,
and in independent spaces especially, like part of the reason I think people gravitate towards independent content is because they want something where they can feel that there is a connection. They understand where it came from. They can kind of get that like personal touch, even if it is not as glossy or not as comprehensive or whatever as the like the bigger, more well funded option.
Yeah, the more product driven stuff versus the like this is a concept piece.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that it's like a music analogy. There's a reason people listen to like obscure Polish black metal bands.
Yeah, it's collecting almost like cred. You know what I mean? Like if you're into this like vibe. Yeah.
But I think you have to be very careful with how much of yourself you put into that, because like at the end of the day, like the internet doesn't care about you, and the people that you are putting all your heart and soul into, they don't care as much about you as you care about you. Like obviously, like at the end of the day, you're just a dude making games or a dude making video or whatever. Like, so I think it can be like super toxic, because I've seen a lot of people just like have, like terrible reactions or like terrible meltdowns or stuff like that. And it can be really like, I can get kind of like low-key anxiety, like arguing with people on the internet, even when it's stuff that is not about me. So if you're throwing yourself like, and when I started out, the first games I really did, like 5 Core and 5 Minute Normandy, had kind of like abstract, weird mechanics. So you get people who just kind of bounce off of them. And I remember there was one guy who like, he was very like polite and clever, but he was just like kind of not getting it. And he kept like going back to these like very specific like examples of like, well, what if this happened? What if this happens? And I would like spend, half a day like pounding at the keyboard.
Engaging
and all
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of that was wasted. Like he wasn't going to get it, and at some point, I suspect he didn't kind of want to get it. He was like locked into the idea that this was dumb.
No,
And,
he's trying to win. He's trying to. He was actively engaged in a game against the author now. So
Yeah,
it didn't matter. It didn't matter what your intent was, because ultimately, in any of those interactions, you have the word of God because you're the writer. You just go, no, it just means this because I say so. And as soon as someone can't accept that, it's like, oh, I'm done talking to you. Like I wrote this game. Sorry, this is how it works. Even if the rules say something different, I'm telling you now, this is how it works. So go get a pen and write that into your book.
What I've adopted these days is that I'll explain to people that this is the intent. Whatever you do from there, however you take what's in the book, that's up to you. If you're upset about that, I'll give you like one alternative, and then
do you find that it can pigeonhole you creatively too? If people like, imagine people now have a perception that you're the journaling game guy. And then you feel compelled to just make nothing but journaling games.
Oh, absolutely.
And you never, you know what I mean? Like, do you ever get that from engaging with people and putting yourself out there that way? That like, oh no, this is what I'm known for. Now this is what I do.
I don't know if it's a consequence of engaging with people as much. I think it is a consequence of like, what like blew up, like across like all the stuff I've done. Like you can find stuff. Like I was looking the other day, I think I did a little like Robin Hood RPG, and I think it sold like 40 copies.
Right.
Like I was happy I wrote it. I didn't think it would sell. And that was just what it was. You have stuff that sold a couple of thousand, and now I have stuff that's, past like 15,000. And that definitely, like, I've never wanted to just like do one specific thing because I just get bored. Like,
heck yeah.
I
would rather die than eat the same meal every day.
Like I just want to like make different things, and I have a lot of different interests. But with the success of like Parsecs and Leagues, there's absolutely the idea that like I'm the solo warband guy. And I like doing solo, I like doing warbands, but like I said, I wouldn't want to just do like only those. Like one of the things I'm working on now is like, platoon company level World War II stuff, just to like do something different. So I think, yes, you do actually do get pigeonholed. I think a lot of authors and writers and designers, I think you're going to, and I do that too. If I think of their name, I will kind of have like an idea like, okay, this is like that guy. He does that stuff, So that definitely happens. I think you can reinforce that. I think it can be dangerous to trade too much on personality, because you do kind of get like, you get into like weird like parasocial stuff. Like maybe that's one of the RPG circles, because those people like talk to people. War gamers can be kind of weird and taciturn.
Well, I mean, war games are funny too, because they do tend to trade in topics that can be uncomfortable. And as soon as you start like, if it ever comes across that you're evangelizing uncomfortable things, you can get dragged into conversations you never thought you'd be having about like
people can get really like touchy about topics like that. Like, I remember a discussion that happened online, and again, this is one I should just like stepped away from immediately, where this guy was playing, I think, 5 Minute Curse, and he was playing a Japanese campaign, and he was doing fine and posting about it. And then he had this moment where he went and did some reading on the campaign and realized that Imperial Japan was kind of a bad place.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah. And he said like, hey, I just realized I kind of can't have fun with this anymore, and I'm going to swap. And I made a post like, yeah, I get it. Like, I'll play anything, but I don't really enjoy playing like campaign games as the Germans in World War II. That's just a thing. And there was a guy who like got really intense about that, because to him, that meant that if he was playing a German campaign, I was somehow like judging him for doing something he wasn't supposed to. And, you can go back and forth with that. And again, like,
that's that danger though. You're the author and you're making a statement about what you believe, but because you're the author, it has like a blanket effect on how people now perceive what it is, if it's right or wrong, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like, so it's
so you have to be careful with that, because that gets you that unintended consequence.
Yeah. And again, like some authors will kind of dive into that. Again, maybe more in the RPG space where, again, like people will trade on personality a lot, but this is a dangerous path to go down, because you're kind of like locking yourself in. And at some point you're going to end up spending more time like arguing with people online than you're ever going to spend like doing stuff that's actually like productive and interesting.
Well, can we talk about best practices then? Because you have now the distilled knowledge of like 7 years of game design. And let's start at like the concept stage. Because one of the things I'm always fascinated when I talk to other game designers is how do you put pen to paper right at the very beginning? Where do you start? Like I'm an outline guy. I will sit with like my yellow legal pads that I have thousands of, and I will outline like just section headers. And then I'll bang that into a Word document, and then I'll fill in under the section of it. It's like my workflow thing. So what's your process for just like getting started?
So it's funny you say that, because that is almost exactly how I start things. I will usually start on paper, partially because I grew up like slightly before computers were an everyday home thing. But I always feel
80, 82, 83. What's the I'm 80, so that was my 80, point.
So exactly the
same age. Perfect. All right, cool.
Our first computer at home was not until 92. So
I will post pictures of my very first ever war game, which is printed on dot matrix printer paper that you have to like take the sides off of. And it's just a complete hack knockoff of Warhammer and Space Hulk like mashed together.
That is amazing. So I always start at just pen and paper, write down. The initial draft is usually not anything more than like a page. And it's just kind of like ultra high concepts of like, it's going to be roughly this scale. It's going to emphasize like these 2 or 3 things. Usually there's like a mechanical basis that I thought would be cool. So I kind of sketch that in, if I want to, and it doesn't have to be something that's real clever. Sometimes it's just like, what if like dice pools, but they were capped at a certain number or whatever. From there, I do much the same thing. I will start sketching out the like chapter headings, because that helps me like pin down. It both acts as a reminder that at some point I'll need to do the terrain, but it also helps like just nail down like the broad concepts. If I put in a thing that says like suppression, even if I haven't figured out how that's going to work yet, now I know that suppression is a thing that I have to kind of build towards. And then I'll just kind of start like putting in the pieces.
Do you use it for pacing? Because I use that structure afterwards as well for making like tasking myself, for being like, I have to finish at least one of these headers. And if I finish more than one, then I'm having a good day, to like get myself through that, like that stamina part of it. I actually use them almost like goalposts.
Yeah, that can work really well. I do that a lot. Sometimes I will just set like a word count and I'll just kind of eyeball, because after a while you get sort of the feel for like, a page is going to be roughly this many words. So if this section is 2 pages, I'll be at this like amount, right?
Right.
But yeah, they can absolutely work for that. I do often, the other thing I will do is, and this is mostly done on paper, is I will scratch down everything that I think of that needs to be done at some point. So sometimes those are specific items like, hey, I need to do like sniper rules or something. So I'll just put that on. Sometimes it'll be feedback I've gotten that I need to go back and tackle, or something that like, in the back of your mind, you're not real happy with, but it's okay. So it'll go on the list, and I'll just kind of tick them off.
Like a chores list almost, for like the stuff that you need to include, need to come back to, you need to even to think out. Like I'll sometimes take those words and then flip to a new page and like do a sketch of that sketch before I start typing, to try and figure out what I even meant by the thing I just wrote down.
Yeah, one thing I do a lot, and I've tried to systematize this. Is that a word? I think it's a word.
It is now. All words are made up. You're fine.
This is true. We're taking back the language. One thing that I find helps an awful lot is to also just sketch out a rule section, like 2 or 3 lines the night before, like a little bit ahead. So
ooh, yeah, just to bang in concepts or something like that before you even start the section. Yeah.
And it may not be anything more complicated, like 1d10, 10s explode, plus minus a couple of things. Like it's not enough that you could really use it on its own, but it gets you like on the track. So I don't know if like subconsciously you like keep thinking about it. Maybe that's how it works, but it makes a tremendous difference. I think sometimes like just the blank page can be intimidating. Like you'll see book authors talk about that all the time. So anything that like gets you like a little bit of head start, like, oh, okay, I just need to start with like a D10 mechanic and like 5 modifiers. I can And then you can start like filling
you
it
can
in.
you can almost see the work to be done. Like you can see the scope of a project once you've got it outlined like that, and it makes it feel attainable. Because I think that is, especially for new authors, that's probably a real problem, is that blank page thing, where it feels overwhelming and like they don't know if they've forgotten something. But if you just sit down and put words down, like it can be 2-3 words per section header, you can go in then and fill all that stuff in underneath, because you can kind of see the size of the whole thing. It's that whole saying of like, how do you eat an elephant? It's just one bite at a time. Like you can get a picture of what it's going to look like.
No, absolutely. And it's easy for this kind of stuff to like end up with like platitudes that people have read in books, because that kind of is like, at the end of the day, even though game design is like a creative element, it is also to an extent like it's writing, like you're churning out words. And I think the difference is tremendous between trying to like think and write at the same time versus writing to a plan. Like if I told you to go write a generic section about like how to set up a Wargames table, you could probably grind out like 3,000 words over your lunch, because it's stuff you already know and you kind of already have a way. But if I told you that it had to be a procedurally generated terrain system for playing on hex maps, you might have to sit and stare at the page for a while, because well, that's like a specific use case and one you may not have an idea for. So that's
and also know the inputs and outcomes, right? Like, because that kind of thing could also have like there's a before section to that part, and then it trails into something else, and you have to know how those two components work too. So it gets there's like a layer of extra complexity at that point.
Yes, that's actually a very specific like craft advice. If you're starting out, don't do a game that is heavily integrated where each piece connects back into another. You will absolutely regret doing that later. It's one of the things that is like the big difference when I did leaks, because we were talking about that with a couple of people that were kind of like bouncing ideas back and forth of like, well, wouldn't it be cool if like all of these things like connected back? So there's a lot of that stuff where it's like, if you meet a character, they can give you a contract, which that could randomly lead to you getting a quest, which could lead to and those things. And like I had to literally go through, so I would write down like contracts, because there's a contract system, and I would go through the book and find every possible place where that could be linked in, and then you have to add an event for that, or you have to add an entry on the table for that, and it's beautiful when it works, and it works mostly really well, but it is a ton of work to do, and it means it is really difficult to then go back and change something. Like if you want to change how like travel works in 5 leagues, you may have a much better system for travel, but guess what? Travel ties into a bunch of other things.
It's linked into all these other sections. Yeah, that's a level 4, level 5 game design thing that you don't want to start with for sure. No, because it's just keeping track of it all could be a nightmare. And you could run it as Steam. You can run it as Energy to write something like that.
No, exactly. And it's something that I think it worked out as well as it did because this was the third like iteration of the same system. So you kind of have like you're past the basics of it, but
well, you can see the structure. You know what I mean? Once you can identify what all the structures are, you can change the names for all the pieces of the structure, but you're going to know how to bolt it together when it's all said and done. You're gonna have some experience. So now your outline's done. What's the next step from there? How do you get writing? Because I think this is the part that is where 90% of people that never finish their game fall off. How do you get yourself actually doing the production part of writing a game?
So I'm going to give the glib answer and the actual answer. The glib answer is that I need to pay my mortgage.
Yeah. Fear will keep these systems in line.
Yes. It's an excellent motivation. If you need an 8,000 word day at the end of the month, well, guess what? We're doing it. The less glib answer is this. Like we talked about, if you can start like slicing some pieces of it, you're already like making headway. The other part is, I think a lot of times people get locked into the idea that if you write, say, the rules for ranged combat in your game, that has to be the full section of all the ranged combat with all the factors and special conditions and so on. But you don't have to start there. And in fact, it's often worse if you do. If you get the basics in, my dude can shoot at your dude falls over. We roll for armor. And you can get those pieces in place. You can get like the very basics in place, like morale checks. You can get the basics in play for moving around and turn sequence. All of the, like, if you boil, especially for a miniatures game, you can kind of boil down, like, you need to be able to move your dudes. They need to be able to attack each other, and they should probably run away at some point. If you can nail down the core of those three things, you have something you can then actually, one, look at as an entity, like as a game or something that looks like a game. And B, you could potentially sit down and put some dudes on your table and see if it actually works.
Right.
I think a big stumbling block is trying to think that if I'm writing the movement rules, I also have to be doing the difficult terrain and the rules for climbing on tanks and the rules for switching positions in a tank. And all of that stuff can happen later, or you may realize that you don't want all of that stuff anyway.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, compartmentalizing can be really important. You can move on and leave an unfinished section in a section. It doesn't have to be a linear process. You can pull out the pieces that make it function and then go and fill in the rest afterwards.
Right. And a lot of them are going to refer back to each other anyway. Like if you're wanting to write your weapons list, but you don't know how combat works yet, you're not really going to be doing much other than just like writing like names and concepts. If you already have the basics of this is how damage works, then you can start filling in a weapon list. Okay, then I can do, if I know I'm going to have separate like injury and armor rules, that means I can have weapons that are effective against dudes without armor and weapons that are good against dudes with armor. Or I can have a weapon that's good against both. So you can start, so knowing the more of those like building blocks and basic pieces, those help you like build the rest of it together. And then from there, you can start like fleshing it out. Like what I will do sometimes is I will sketch everything out very loosely, and then I'll just kind of go back to a section and say, okay, today I'm going to like take the movement rules and I'm going to start building those out to the full version that they need to be.
Right.
Because you have the structure in place. And I think a lot of times games that can feel disjointed or like they don't really fit together, I think they can have run into that where you're trying, there's a famous old role, I want to say space opera or something, an old RPG where the rules were a mess because each section was literally written by a different person and like mailed in an envelope and they stapled it together.
Yeah, it's like a Frankenstein of a game because it's all different voices and different references and stuff like that.
Yeah, and you can run into that on your own, I think, if you're trying to like front load all of this stuff as opposed to and it's part of it is just being kind of practical with it. Like the purpose of you writing this is that you're making a game, right? Like that's
someone's going to sit down. Someone else has to sit down and understand what was in your head and then be able to make the actions that you describe and get the outcome that you were looking for. That's the thing that you kind of always have to come back to is wait, I understand this, but I have to make this into a shape that anyone else could understand at some point.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So what about process? When do you write and how long do you write? Because that's something else that I think people struggle with is the time. And I know every author is different, but what is your like preferred time of day? When do you have the most energy? When do you know you're done? Like very often I'll have to set a time limit for myself. Like I know when my mental operating hours are, and I know when to like get up and walk away. But even when you first start off, you're not going to know anything about yourself in that regard. So like, what would you look for? What would you give old you the advice about?
Part of it is that you're just going to have to like stumble into it. A lot of people I think have like naturally, like I think time of day is like overlooked as a factor in like what you can do. Now, a lot of people are better off in the morning and they can do the thing about getting up at 5 and like sitting down at the keyboard. I would die. I get up, I crawl out of bed at 10 and I still feel like I'm getting up early. So
I'm a 5 guy. I'm a 5 guy. I usually go to the gym for 6.
But that's one of those things you just have to like understand about yourself. And I think trying to like change that will just make you miserable. Like if you're a person who just prefers sitting up at 2 in.the morning when it's quiet and dark out, and like swilling coffee and writing games, do that. Like, if you're a morning person, then get up early.
And if you're doing this before you like in your spare time, you might not get to choose your optimum time to do it at because it might just be the spare time you have.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff I started doing was just that's what I would do in the evening. But in that case, you kind of have to like either it's your hobby and it's hobby time. Like if you're just sitting making a game because it's fun and enjoyable to do and then do that whenever you would take your hobby time. Like get off, the internet and go write for an hour. If you're looking to make it work, then I hate to say it, but you're going to have to treat it as a job you're not yet getting paid for because you
have to schedule time. Yeah, you have to schedule. You have to make it a priority and make it a consistent thing that you do.
Yeah, and like I get that's really difficult because, you know, you might have a job and you might have kids and you might have cats or whatever, like stuff happens, but you have to also kind of be like blunt with yourself. Like, how much time am I spending just sitting and watching YouTube videos? You can find like half an hour to sit down. Like, I forget what author it was that said something like, if all you do is write 500 words every day, in like 2 years, you're going to have like an enormous novel. So, which is absolutely true. Like, and for some people, like setting like that concrete goal is helpful. Like, I'm going to get 500 words on the page or 100 or 1,000 or whatever this day. Like, I use word counts a lot, again, just because they once you kind of get like how much a page will take up. You know,
I'm more brutal about that because I try to make each section concise. So word count doesn't work for me. That's why I go with those section headers. Like, how many headers do I go through? Because otherwise, if it's word count, I am definitely capable of using way too many words to explain anything because I'm a maniac and I'm a narcissist. And I will like sounding smarter than I am. But in game design, often that's the thing that makes it feel impenetrable, right? So you have to like that was why word count for me was such a red herring, because I was just like, oh, I can make this 25,000 words, like no problem. This 10-page rule book could be 150 pages if I try really hard.
And that's a danger you definitely have to kind of watch out for. But as far as like amount of time, like I tend to. The problem is I don't really time myself because I'll have a list of things I'm working on. Like right now, I have a handful of different projects I'm kind of tinkering with to see which one will pan out. So I'll sit down, I'll work on one of those, doing whatever I had like planned for the previous day. So like, okay, today I'm going to write like how selecting characters works or something. Then I will step away, usually go do a chore and then come back to it. A book that was really helpful for me is by a guy, Cal Newport. He has a book called Deep Work. And it's mostly aimed at like high level, like academics. So, but the two kind of key pieces that I took away from it was one, distracted work is far like inferior compared to what he calls deep work, which is just the idea of sitting and working, concentrating on a single topic or a single like project. And I can definitely tell that, like, if I have Discord open while I'm doing something, I am 3 lines further down the page, like, 20 minutes later.
I can't write at the studio. I can never write at the studio. I have to go it sounds like cliched, but I have to go to like a coffee shop or someplace where I'm isolated by having people around and like a time limit of my parking to have like a super productive day. Like I can punch up or like do notes or do outlines and stuff at the studio, but there's always something that will catch my attention and be like, oh, I should sweep that, or oh, that plant needs water. Or like there's a million things in this building that I can't ignore enough to really get to that like flow state.
No, absolutely. So my work desk is a little corner desk that faces a wall with no decorations. I do have a little like stuffed turtle on there to keep me company, but otherwise I don't keep like trinkets on my work desk. It's just like the desk is the smallest amount of space. It'll still fit my notepads and my computer and my monitor.
I got a lot of miles out of the Google Doc like format and having like I love the super cheap Chromebook just because the battery lasts forever. It's super small and light. I can take it anywhere and I can write and it all self-populates. There's a million writing assets out there. There's Evernote. There's like a ton of these like specific for writing things. But if you're out there and you're just looking to start for free, a Chromebook and all the Google Docs in the world are more than enough to get you writing damn near anything on earth.
I know a lot of people will create separation for devices. Like they'll have a separate machine they write on.
That's what I have.
For me, although my computer is mostly, if I'm around the house, I just use my iPad for everything. So my Mac is mostly for writing. And if that helps people, absolutely do that. Like anything that. Also, if you're moving into like full-time writing and design, like at some point you're going to have that realization that your work is also something that is your hobby, and you are going to need to start like putting some barriers for that. So a lot of that.
Go ahead. No,
I was just going to say a lot of that is just like figuring out, and you kind of have to like mess it up. If you're sitting in your bedroom writing, and after a week of trying every night, it's just not going anywhere.
Yeah, like
go sit on the porch or go to the like. I wrote all.
I was gonna say that sounds like you've got
at a Starbucks.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say is find what helps you focus, find tools that support that. Like having that Chromebook for me is about taking away the Discord and taking away the other open windows and all that stuff, right? And find a situation that's going to help you do that. Because when you first start out, you'd have no idea what these things are going to be. But just even asking yourself that question, like, did I feel good writing today? Did I get into that state where like I was flowing and I was like, I got a whole bunch of work done? And then ask yourself like, why, what time of day is it? What could that be? All of those things will help you be more productive. So let's say that it's filled in, like all the sections work is done. This is kind of like our last, I guess my last question for today. What is the moment where, and how do you approach for the first time, putting it out into the world? Because let's not go too, because we'll talk about this when we talk to the authorship stuff later on with like layout and art and design and stuff like that. But you are just getting started. What do you think the biggest on-ramp is for putting it in front of people? Like how would you, if you were starting from scratch right now, what would you do with all the knowledge you have?
The first thing I would tell myself if I was doing it all over is that the fear and dread of publishing anything will never ever go away. So you just have to like make friends with that. You're showing your whole ass when you do that. Like you are inviting criticism immediately. That is a endless thing. Oh yeah. And there's always like, I think a lot of writers and designers are prone to imposter syndrome. So there's always that feeling of like, what if I'm just like crap at this and like this whole thing is just garbage, you know?
And everyone hates me. That's right.
Yeah. Like I will lose my friends and my cat will pee on my couch. Like it's going to be terrible. So part of it is like a psychological thing. It's just like, you have to grit your teeth and like commit to it, like put it out there. Nowadays, I mean, for miniatures, usually you're probably talking like DriveThru or Wargames Vault. That's where you're going. Even
Amazon though, here in Canada, if you can just get a cover on it, you can use a basic Google Doc to get it in print.
Yeah, and there's like it is more RPG, but I've seen the occasional minis game you can do. Like, there's a lot of options. Like, maybe that's a question for the next time because it's the like, do you want to be a small fish in a small pond or a small fish in a much larger pond that has more people fishing in it? Yeah, that's a terrible analogy, but you get what I'm saying.
But there's no reason not to just throw a title sheet on it and throw it up somewhere, because the worst thing that's going to happen is you pay what you want, and someone gives you $1 for it, and you will ride the high of that dollar into every revision and edit of that game that you have to do. That first $1 is amazing.
Oh, absolutely. The first, when I did 5 Men in Normandy, I had put up a little Indiegogo. It got, I think, 8 people supporting it.
Hell yeah.
But the hateful eight. But one of those 8 people made a blog post where he said he had enjoyed the game and he posted a picture of it. And like, I don't want to like sound super cheesy, but it is entirely possible that dude like convinced me to keep writing games.
But that's it. When you see something you made in the real world, I would say that the whole sum of this conversation we just had, that's what you're chasing. When you see someone else take the time to put the vision that you had out into the real world and have the experience that you crafted, you will you'll never forget that moment. Like that is a thing that you can come back to get the energy to like fight the imposter syndrome and do the revisions and answer all the comments, take all the feedback.
No, absolutely. And it's the reminder, like, what the point of the whole thing is. Like, you put in a lot of hard work, a lot of, the metaphysical or metaphorical, like blood, sweat, and tears, maybe literally.
It can be.
So, and like there is a payoff. And I think what makes game design so powerful, kind of like writing, is that, but in a slightly different way, is that it is a very personal experience for people. Like, you will get people who connect very like personally to a specific game or something you created because you help them do something in life. Like, I got a lot of email during like COVID for people who were like,
I bet,
and it was one of those, like, I tried to be like very practical about what I do. Like, we're writing rules for plastic soldiers.
Yeah. I'm not saving the world here or anything, but.
Right. But it's also one of those moments where like, okay, for a moment there, you can kind of see like, holy shit, like I did something that like meant something to a person. And that's like, that's the moment where you realize that even though so much of game design and writing is craft, that at the end, when it's finished, it becomes art. It transforms in art and it elicits an emotion and an experience from people. And that's where that feedback resonates from, right?
Because honestly, art and craft, you don't make art without craft. There's no accidental art. It doesn't happen. And that's the other unspoken like reality of, well, I want to be an artist. It's like, well, how long have you tried to make art? It's like, well, I just want to be an artist first. And it's like, that's not how any of this works. You can't do it this way. But I think you're absolutely right, is that you get this sort of like unintended response occasionally, and that can even cause you to like chase the next idea even harder, and like be more dialed in on, oh, it should be an experience. Because at some point you do have to have some sort of like, positive, like you have to see like results and responses out of what you're making. Like I think humans are kind of wired to like be satisfied when we build things, when we create things. Absolutely.
It's the same reason that like going and like raking your lawn or planting a flower can feel so satisfying, even though it's really...
You see it in babies with blocks. We are intrinsically wired to push things into new and pleasing shapes. And this is just like a very complicated outgrowth of that, right? Minecraft wouldn't be the most successful video game of all time if that wasn't true, right? Game design can result in that.
But I think it can be difficult to like see that at times, because the starting point you're having is, especially if you aren't sure of the craft yet, like a lot of craft is learning how to make like complex things simpler, or just like learning how to do them. Like, it's figuring out like, how do I fit this complex thing to like half the page count that I thought it was going to fit in, or whatever. Like it's a bunch of like practical things, and it can be easy to like be intimidated when you don't have those yet.
Well, I think you can't see yet. I think you can't see yet how it comes together as a whole. And I would say after that's what you're chasing after that first time completing it, because the first time you complete it, it might not be any good and you might not be happy with it later on. But you realize that this is the work now, and this is how I do this, so that in the future I'm basically a movie director. I'm creating a movie someone's going to experience, but the movie might change every time they experience it over and over. The story changes, the outcome changes, the thing changes, but you're still crafting a vibe and a setting and an experience. And that's, I think, once you get over that initial hump of, can I do this? That's where you can start being like, I want to do this again, but this time, this is what I want the people that take this to come away with, is this kind of experience in the thing. Sweet.
No, absolutely.
But we're gonna get into the next topic if we go much further, I think.
That's fair.
Yeah. So I hope that's useful for people, because honestly, Ivan, if there were more people like you that were honestly making a living doing this, which we're going to talk about in our next video, which you guys will see next week, and approached it it just had the leg up of everything we just talked about today, I would be so happy, because I think that is where you get a real marketplace of ideas, and we get enriched by having more and interesting experiences. Sweet. Well, thanks for giving your advice.
You're so welcome. Look forward to the next chat.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you guys next week. And yeah, if you guys want to get started in game design, I highly recommend that you check out Ivan's catalog, because he has a game for damn near every genre, and that play both head-to-head, cooperatively. So it'll all be linked in the cards below. You can check it out and maybe find a game for you. He's got solo play, co-op, head-to-head, every genre, science fiction, fantasy, military, medieval. I think you've got damn near everything. So there's definitely something in there for you. Yeah. Well, sorry, for now. Yeah. Until you come up with your next thing. And also you can get hardcovers of 5 Leagues and 5 Parsecs from Modiphius, of which I held up one at the beginning of this whole thing. Lovely full color prints.
Absolutely.
So I'll link
make
those
sure
too.
to check if you're stateside, use the US store. So shipping will not be quite as brutal. They do also show up on Amazon, I think.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for watching another Inside Tabletop. You can check out all of Ivan's catalog on Wargames Vault and DriveThruRPG with links in the description. Have a good one.